right, good morning or afternoon, depending on which class it is. I had not expected to be absent today, so I've recorded this lesson so that we will not lose any time. As you can see, we are going to be talking about World War I and the Russian Revolution. Now, here are our targets, and yeah, there's several. I will be going through them slowly, but I wanted you to have them as a whole to start with. So we're going to analyze the causes and effects of World War I with emphasis on the following four things: militarism, imperialism, nationalism, and alliances. We are going to look at the global scope and outcomes and the human costs of the war. See the role of new technologies and practices, and those include the use of poison gas, trench warfare, machine guns, airplanes, submarines, tanks, and then we will be looking at the Treaty of Versailles, which will end the war, and the creation of the League of Nations. Excuse me. Number two, we're going to explain how differing points of view play a role in the conflicts over territory and resources. We will analyze the costs in human life and the property as a result of the war. We're going to analyze how governments and other groups use propaganda to influence public opinion and behavior. And then we're going to look at the consequences of World War I and the worldwide depression that set the stage for the Russian Revolution, the rise of totalitarianism, the aggressive Axis expansion, which would be Germany under Hitler, and the policy of appeasement, which led in turn to World War II. Right, these are all videos that we will be watching. Don't worry about them. You don't need to be looking them up or doing anything with this at all. All right, so we're going to begin with an acronym called MANIA. And this is a way to remember the causes of World War I. And I defined mania, in case you didn't know, as mental excuse me, as mental illness marked by periods of great excitement, euphoria, delusions, and overactivity. And to be honest, from what I can see, that's exactly what World War I was. It was just a time of really this attitude of war is glorious, and the excitement and the euphoria of going to war, and then the delusions of war, and finally the overactivity of war. So we're going to begin with the acronym M, and that I already put in there for you, is militarism and the arms race in Europe. That's the M of mania. The A is alliances, and we're going to define these as we go along. Nationalism is the N, imperialism is the I, and finally an assassination will be the last A in mania. Okay, those are the five causes of the World War I. So remember that, mania. Okay. All right, so the Balkans were a cluster of nations in Eastern Europe between Austria and the Ottoman empires. And the Balkans are going to play a major role in this whole setup of starting the war. Their location made the Balkans strategically important, so European powers were focused on events there. And the Balkans were also politically volatile, meaning they were a hotbed of ethnic and nationalist tension. Lots of stuff going on in the Balkans. And the Balkans were disrupted by two wars in 1912 and 13, as well as the rising of the Serbian nationalist group. And let's look at a picture or a map of the Balkans. The Balkans was the area that is just by the tip of Italy. It's underneath what was then known as the Austria-Hungary Empire, near Russia, and it's this whole area of small nations that had once been controlled by the Ottoman Empire. They no longer were. They had gained some semblance of independence although Bulgaria still remained pretty connected to the Ottoman Empire. But Greece had won its independence, as had Macedonia, Albania, and Montenegro. Bosnia-Herzegovina existed, but that also was controlled by Austria-Hungary. Serbia, which seemed to be kind of the ornery stepbrother of the this whole group of nations. Bulgaria, and then Romania. And this is an area that is known as the Balkans, and it will be basically a powder keg waiting to go off, and it will in 1914. Right. So we're going to talk about the first M, militarism and the growing rivalries in Europe. Militarism means that the army and the military forces are given great influence in the government, and the growing European divide, distrust, in other words, had led to an arms race between the main countries. The armies of both France and Germany had more than doubled between 1870 and 1914, and there was fierce competition between Britain and Germany for the mastery of the seas. Okay, British had introduced what was known as the dreadnought, and that was a very effective battleship in 1906. And the Germans soon followed suit, introducing their own battleships. The German, von Schlieffen, he was a general in the German army, also drew up a plan of action that involved attacking France through Belgium if Russia made an attack on Germany. And that's going to play a big role here in the start of the war. We'll see how that happens as we move forward. All right, I want to define militarism a little bit more. Militarism is painted as romantic. It was seen as this opportunity for great glory, and they dress the part. If you'll see all these old movies, you'll see how the generals and the emperors and everybody just who were part of the military were dressed in outrageous outfits, and it was all about the romance of going to war. It was also about social Darwinism, the idea of racism, and that they had this superior attitude, superior abilities, and for them, that was the glorification of war. Nations expand their armies and navies, causing nations to be suspicious of each other, which, as you can see in that first paragraph, with regards to England builds its dreadnought, and Germany sees it and gets right after building their own. It's also about jealousy. They each wanted what the other had. Okay. Readiness for war becomes a primary concern for each nation. On matters of peace and war, governments turn to military leaders for advice, which is always dangerous. Think about this. Here's a question. If military leaders enjoy great respect, and they do, what would their advice be to government leaders? Government leaders are asking, what should we do when another country builds something that looks like military? Well, guess what? Military leaders are going to say, get ready for war. All right, now our second A, which is alliance. Alliance is an agreement made between two or more countries to give each other help if needed. When an alliance is signed, those countries become known as allies. Okay, a number of alliances have been signed by countries between the year 1879 and 1914. These were important because that meant that some countries had no option but to declare war on one of their allies, declare if one of their allies declare war first. And we're going to see here exactly what happens. In 1879, you're going to have a dual alliance that begins with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Then in 1881, you're going to have Austro-Serbian alliance. Austria-Hungary makes an alliance with Serbia to stop Russia from gaining control of Serbia. And then in 1882, the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, make an alliance with Italy to stop Italy from taking sides with Russia. And if you're seeing a theme here, it's all about, in this case, these countries protecting themselves against the Russian giant. That's how they see Russia as being this huge giant. Okay, Franco, in 1894, Franco-Russian alliance. Russia forms an alliance with France to protect herself against Germany and Austria-Hungary because of all that's happening up here. And then in 1904, the Entente Cardinal. This is an agreement, but it is not a formal alliance between France and Britain. They're going to support each other. And then in 1907, Anglo-Russian Entente, and this is an agreement between Britain and Russia. So now these groups are forming. And then the Triple Entente, this was made between Russia, France, and Britain to counter the increasing threat from Germany that they saw was going on up here and here. And then finally in 1914, the Triple Entente, meaning no separate peace. In other words, Britain, Russia, and France agreed not to sign for peace separately. That unless they all agree to it, none of them will go to will choose to sign a peace treaty. So these are all the alliances that are being formed, and they're the main countries that we're talking about. We're talking about Russia, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, France, and Britain. All of these countries are beginning to prepare for war. By the way, and I meant to say this sooner, any of these that you see, don't bother looking up at this point. You can if you want to. I will be coming back and then addressing the videos. All right, so here's a picture or a map of what Europe looks like at this point in time. Wanted you to get a clear picture of it. Of course, Great Britain's right here, an island, and that includes Ireland. And then Spain and Portugal don't really play a major role here. But France, excuse me, Germany, Austria, Hungary, here are the Balkans again. Russia, all of them are the big players here. These are the big players in World War I. All right, there's the Balkans. Just another picture of the Balkans. All right, now we're moving on to the A in the first A in Mania, and that's alliances. And these are all the pre-war, and of course I talked about those already. You saw the agreements that were already there. They were formed in Europe because these countries feared and distrusted each other. And this led to the formation of alliances. They feared and distrusted each other. And then their purpose was to create powerful combinations so no one would dare attack. Well, we know that didn't work because, hey, we went to war. So, but that was their original intent. Didn't work so well. All right, I'm going to move on from that. And that is a different thing. Okay, now we're to nationalism. All right, nationalism. This is the N in Mania. And we've talked about it before, but we're going to say it again. There are two kinds of nationalism in the 19th century. Okay, the desire by the subject people, those people who have been colonized, the ones who've been taken over for independence. And this led to a series of national struggles for independence among the Balkan people, which, remember, that was the first map that we looked at, those small countries that were between the Ottoman Empire and the Austria-Hungary Empire. Other powers got involved and caused much instability in the Balkans. All right, then the desire. There's the second kind of nationalism is the desire for independent nations, that would be the colonizers, those who went and took over countries, for dominance. And that continued attitude that we can control, we are powerful, we should be in charge. And of course that meant prestige, look how powerful we are. As the powers try to dominate each other in Europe, their rivalries may be regarded as one of the causes of World War I. All right, so rivalries among European powers. What were the causes of the rivalries between the European nations? And the first one was there was an economic rivalry. It wasn't just a simple "we don't like you." There were real causes for these rivalries. First of all, economic rivalries. This is, for example, this is when Britain sees Germany's rapid economic growth, and they did. They grew just amazingly fast in strength. Germany didn't actually come to be a country until 1873. And in those few years, between 1873 and 1914, Germany turned their economy around and became what we would consider today a superpower. Britain, on the other hand, had gradually become a superpower. They didn't do it in just a few, they took a couple centuries to become a superpower. So Britain sees Germany's rapid growth as basically a threat. And then respect. Here's another one. Germany believed the world did not respect their strength. And in fact, they didn't, mostly because Germany had grown so quickly, like I just said, that countries didn't see them as much of a threat yet because they were, in their minds, a baby. How could they have power when they were just such a new country? Well, they did. And so most of those countries definitely underestimated them. All right, then of course we have territorial ambitions, and if you have any questions about that, that's imperialism. We're talking about imperialism here. Competition for colonies. And then finally, revenge. Now, we have jumped over some things, mostly because we just simply don't have time to cover all areas of history. But what had happened between, or actually while, imperialism going on, we have a lot of small little wars, of course, the grabbing up of colonies, and countries got their feelings hurt, in essence, and they wanted revenge. Now, if they lost a war, they wanted revenge. If they lost land, like to colonism or colonialism, or money, then they wanted revenge. And it wasn't just one country feeling they needed revenge. There were, France believed they were wronged by Germany. Germany felt they were wronged by most of the other countries. And we could go on and on about the different reasons for revenge. But right there, those four reasons are the reasons that there was so much rivalries among the European powers. So then that takes us to a form of nationalism, which is aggressive nationalism. And it's not, excuse me, just I want countries, but now it's I will have control. It's aggressive. They're going out to grab everything they can. So these European nations have extreme pride in their military, especially Germany. I mean, way over the top pride. Some nations are bitter over old defeats. We kind of talked about that, looking for revenge already. And then there's something kind of a little bit new that we have not talked about yet, and that's Pan-Slavism. Slavic people, these are the people, and they are part of that Balkans area, including Russia. And this is their heritage, is Slavism, not slavism, Slavic people, which I know it sounds funny, but that's the term they used. Okay, so Pan-Slavism, which is the Slavic people, Russia's vowed to protect any Slavic people. And so Russia, and we're going to see a connection here, Russia sees the countries in the Balkan as Slavic people, and they want to protect them. Well, the reality is Russia really wanted to use that as a political tool to gain political and military influence over those nations in the Balkans. So there was really an ulterior motive. It sounds like, oh, they're going to protect them. Well, really, what Russia wanted was to control those nations. They were looking for colonies. All right, and this down here, the Slavic population are particularly concentrated in Russia, the Ukraine, Poland, Czech Republic, Serbia, Belarus, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Croatia, Bosnia, Slovenia, the Republic of Macedonia, and Montenegro. These countries are all in that general area of the Balkans. Okay, again, a map. We're looking at the buildup, 1914. Now, you can see here, England has not built up. One thing they have done is they have built their navy, but in terms of their military army, they haven't done much. Look at Germany. Look how many they have. Look at Russia. Russia has built up their military. France, building up. Seeing what Germany's doing, building up. Austria-Hungary, sorta. Not really, but sorta, building up. These are all prior to the war. This is how they are building their war machine. Okay, so the fear of nationalism also by aging empires like the Ottomans and Austria-Hungary are causing issues too. Austria-Hungary fears the rebellion within its empire. They have already are already seeing that the areas of the Balkans are really stirring up trouble. And the Ottoman Empire feels threatened by the nations in the Balkan as well because they're stirring up trouble. Right. In 1912, the Balkan states, these countries, attack Turkey in an effort to kind of be in charge. 1913, Balkan states are fighting among themselves. They don't even get along with each other. That's how bad it is there. In 1914, Balkans are basically a powder keg. They are ready to explode. And here's my little, oops, I gotta get here. And there's the explosion. Don't you like that? I think that's cute. Okay, there's my little fun thing here. So, all right, so they're getting ready to explode. One thing this does do, though, is it shows that how the actual thing that lights the candle is the one that gets burned up. And let me tell you, Balkans will really, really be devastated by World War I. All right. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. And here we go. Imperialism is when a country takes over new lands or countries and makes them subject to their rule. This should sound familiar, right? We're talking about something we've been talking about. Europeans in the late 19th century increasingly choose to safeguard their access to markets and raw materials and returns on their investments by seizing outright political and military control of the undeveloped world. This is just a brief paragraph to remind you what imperialism is. By 1900s, the British Empire extended over 5 continents. France had control of a large area in Africa. With the rise of industrialism, countries needed new markets. The amount of lands owned by Britain and France increased the rivalry with Germany, who had entered the scramble to acquire colonies late and only had a small area in Africa. And that ticked them off. They didn't like that. They wanted to be as big or as powerful in their eyes as Britain and France. So imperialism goals are resources, raw materials, prestige, and national security. We haven't spent much time talking about national security. The reality is that some of these countries were a buffer or a kind of an area to, if any attack occurred, they would take the brunt, and that would mean that the France or that Britain or Germany would not be immediately affected. So it was a national security thing, keeping these countries secure. All right, now our final one, assassination. Assassination was a particular event which will start World War I. And this was Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria. He was assassinated. He and his wife decided to visit a country, a city in, he and his wife decided to visit Sarajevo, which is a city or capital of Bosnia in June 28, 1914. Now, Archduke Francis Ferdinand is the nephew of the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, a small empire, but it still had at least some prestige. And Austria-Hungary had a large presence when it comes to the Balkans. But the Balkans don't really like them around. Remember, they are nations that are in conflict with each other and with the countries around them. All right, his visit will anger the Serbian nationalists in Bosnia. They view Austrians as foreign oppressors. At this point in time, Bosnia is controlled by Austria-Hungary. And the Serbian nationalists don't want it. They don't like it at all. They see them as, again, these people who are come to control them. The same date in 1912, which was 2 years before, Serbia had freed itself from Ottoman rule. So they saw it as a slap in the face of their freedoms. That this guy comes strolling into Sarajevo, and because Austria-Hungary still controls Bosnia. And Serbia, or the Serbian nationalists, see that as something that is not acceptable. So a group known as Black Hand, which were Serbian terrorist group, vows to take action against these oppressors, and they say death to the tyrant. And so we're going to see that what happens is this assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie set off a chain of events, of rapid events. Austria-Hungary, like many countries around the world, blame Serbian government for the attack and hope to use the incident as a justification for settling the question of Slavic nationalism once and for all. Now, Russia, that brings Russia in. Remember, Russia is all about protecting Slavic people. And as Russia supported Serbia, Austria-Hungary waited to declare war until its leaders received assurances from German leader Kaiser Wilhelm II that Germany would support their cause in the event of a Russian intervention, which would likely involve Russia's ally France and possibly Great Britain as well. So what's happening here is this assassination, and when I get back, we'll talk more about the assassination. I'm giving you just a very brief description here. We're going to see what happens, and we're going to take a look at the assassination itself, and then take a closer look at the chain of events that will come to be World War I. Okay, here it finally is the last website. If you'd like to take a look at it, 25 interesting things you did not know about World War I. I saw some of this. It's pretty interesting, so feel free to take a look at it, and that will hopefully cause you to say, I didn't know that. All right, that's it for this section, and the sub will most likely have additional instructions for you. Okay, thank you, and we'll talk tomorrow, I guess.